This video was brought to you by Imprint. When the Dutch coalition government first published their manifesto back in May, their most controversial policy area was immigration. They pledged to freeze asylum applications, massively limit immigration rights, and deport more people. Then on Friday, the Netherlands published an updated government programme, confirming that the country wants to opt out of the EU's new migration pact and build a so-called mini Schengen zone with like-minded countries. So in this video, we'll take a look at the Netherlands' new migration reforms, branded the strictest in Europe, why they want to opt out of the EU's new migration pact, and whether these plans can actually work. Before we start, if you're interested in global alliances and groupings like Schengen, then you might like our brand new poster, Every Alliance Explains, which shows, in slightly confusing detail, how every country interacts with each other. It's available by clicking the link in the description, and for a limited time, you can get 20% off with code Schengen. But first, let's start with some context. The Netherlands governing coalition is made up of four right-wing parties: the Centre-Right People's Party, or VVD, the New Social Contract Party, or NSC, the Populist Agrarian Farmers Citizen Movement, and the Freedom Party, or PVV, who are usually described as far-right and have some of the strictest migration and asylum policies in Europe. Now, immigration was a major issue at the last national election in November, helping the PVV, led by Geert Wilders, come out on top, winning a quarter of the vote share and 37 seats in the 150-seat House of Representatives, unseating the centre-right VVD as the largest party in the Netherlands for the first time since 2010. Anyway, the PVV's notable success at the last election signalled the direction of Dutch politics would be heading in, with a more nationalistic agenda and a key emphasis on reforming the asylum system, working towards what the current cabinet calls the strictest asylum regime ever. So let's take a look at the specific policies set out on Friday. And it covers 6 main points, so we'll take a look at each of them in turn. First up is activating the exemptions clause from the Foreigners Act 2000. Essentially, this will allow the government to establish rules for extenuating circumstances, meaning that they could, for example, far more easily revoke asylum permits, expand the definition of undesirability so that more people who cause a nuisance could be deported, and legally rejecting applications where foreigners don't appear for a hearing. For Article 111, the exemptions clause to come into effect, a royal decree must be signed by the king, followed by a bill passed through the House of Representatives. And if it does go through all of that, then it would basically give the government powers to take extraordinary measures without parliamentary approval. The opposition Socialist and Green Left Labour parties have condemned the proposal, calling it anti-democratic and really scandalous, while the PVV's Migration and Asylum Minister argued that it's legal and necessary to, quote, declare an asylum crisis. This brings us on to point 2, which is introducing a new Asylum Crisis Act. This is a temporary law that would introduce extra powers to freeze all decisions on asylum applications and deport as many people as possible, including, the programme specifies, by force. The government also adds that they'll take additional measures at the border, although it's not exactly clear what this means. The third and perhaps most headline-grabbing policy is opting out of the EU's new Pact on Asylum and Migration, which took nearly 4 years to negotiate and was only finalised in June this year. The bit that Wilders and co are presumably objecting to is the so-called solidarity mechanism, which obliges member states to take in asylum seekers from countries that receive a disproportionate number. In practice, this will involve redistributing asylum seekers from so-called frontier countries like Italy to Central European states like the Netherlands. There's therefore basically zero chance that the EU will agree to this, given that it would effectively undermine the entire project. Alongside this, the Netherlands also wants to build a mini Schengen with, quote, like-minded and surrounding countries. This isn't actually a new idea either. Back in 2015, the Netherlands floated a similar scheme including Austria, Germany, Belgium and Luxembourg, but it didn't really go anywhere. Fourth is a comprehensive asylum reform package. This is basically a whole load of structural reforms to reduce overall entries into the Netherlands and increase the rate of deportations. When implemented, family members will be restricted, and the burden of proof for the right to asylum will be placed almost entirely on the individual. legal assistance for asylum seekers will also be restricted. It will be more difficult to appeal decisions, shelter will be downgraded, and emergency accommodation will be shut down. The fifth point is specifically about Ukrainian asylum seekers. Until this summer, the Netherlands had given accommodation and living allowances to Ukrainian refugees, but they're now stopping all accommodation support for those with an income. This is normally about increasing their financial independence, and Ukrainian citizens are still covered by the EU's newly extended temporary protection mechanism until March 2026, but the Dutch requirements for support are markedly stricter. And finally, number 6 involves tightening the naturalization requirements for Dutch citizenship. The government is doubling the 5-year waiting period to 10, with naturalized citizens expected to renounce their original nationality after obtaining Dutch nationality. The government is also raising the language requirement for naturalization to B1, i.e. intermediate, and wants migrants to, quote, become productive on the labour market as quickly as possible. So now we've been through all of the details, will the Netherlands' new asylum reforms actually work? Well, it's clear they want to make it far more difficult for asylum seekers and their family to enter the Netherlands legally. And it's also likely that more deportations will happen, which could significantly reduce the flow of migration into the country. However, some of the proposals are perhaps best understood as a form of electioneering rather than serious policy proposals. As we mentioned earlier, opting out of the EU's migration pact is essentially unworkable and highly unlikely to be approved, given that there are only 5 opt-out clauses in action at the moment. The first 2 being Denmark's exemptions from the Eurozone and the Area of Freedom, Security and Justice, or AFSJ, the next 2 being Ireland's exemptions from the AFSJ and the Schengen area, due to its common border with the UK, and the 5th being Poland's exemption from the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Wilders and Schoof know this, and this probably is more about burnishing their anti-immigration and Eurosceptic credentials with their base. These policies also risk igniting tensions within the coalition over migration and asylum policies. Specifically, while the PVV has been an outspoken supporter of the asylum programme, with Wilders suggesting that the cabinet should go even further and introduce border controls, the other coalition parties have kept fairly tight-lipped about it, with reports this week suggesting that the centre-right NSC party will withdraw their support if the Council of States ultimately advises against it. Ultimately, we'll have to see whether this ultra-strict asylum package actually pays dividends, and it'll be an interesting test for other migration-skeptic parties in Europe about the actual viability of hardline immigration policies. Fans of TLDR, like you, care about understanding the world around them. And that's where today's sponsor Imprint comes into play. Because if you care about building a life of learning, then Imprint is the app for you. It's a brand new way to learn, built from the ground up. And seriously, unless you've used the app before, you likely haven't experienced anything like this. That's because Imprint is beautifully illustrated and animated, creating a highly visual, bite-sized, and interactive learning experience. It's the perfect antidote to a world where social media tries to keep us mindlessly dopamine scrolling day in, day out. Their library includes courses on topics like psychology, history, philosophy, finance, productivity, and many more, as well as quick reads you can consume in a single sitting. In fact, I've been using the Essential Philosophy, Theories and Thinkers course, and it's been an excellent way to brush up on some knowledge from college that I genuinely thought was lost. And with all of the developments happening these days, from elections to AI to geopolitical tensions, it's been helpful to revisit some of the world's greatest thinkers. So make yourself feel better about your screen time, build a real habit of learning every day, and join the millions of people using Imprint. If you use the link in the description, the first 200 people will get 20% off an annual plan. Plus, they'll know you came from us.